Evelyn Ashford, a widow in her early 60s, was particularly respected for her volunteer work at the local hospital and her famous peach cobbler, which won ribbons at the county fair year after year. Her son, Rowan, had recently returned to Mill Creek after completing his degree in civil engineering at the University of Utah. At 28, he was considered quite the catch by the local young women, with his striking eyes and easy smile. But Rowan's heart belonged to Avery Loran, a vivacious girl he had met during his final year of college. Avery had moved to Mill Creek shortly after graduation, quickly winning over most of the town with her warm personality and dedication to her work as a graphic designer for a local advertising firm. As Rowan and Avery's whirlwind romance blossomed into marriage, few could have predicted the dark undercurrents that would soon surface. Beneath the joyous celebration of their union lay a secret that would set in motion a chain of events leading to betrayal, murder, and the unraveling of a family. Rowan Ashford and Avery Loran's love story began on a crisp autumn day in Salt Lake City. Rowan, then a senior at the University of Utah, was hurrying across campus when he collided with Avery, sending her portfolio scattering across the quad. As they scrambled to gather her sketches, their eyes met, and something clicked. Rowan was immediately drawn to Avery's vibrant eyes and infectious laugh, while Avery found herself charmed by Rowan's earnest apologies and gentle demeanor. Their first date was at a local coffee shop, where they talked for hours about their dreams and aspirations. Rowan shared his passion for sustainable urban development, while Avery spoke enthusiastically about her goal of using art to make a positive impact on the world. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened, and they found themselves falling deeply in love. What Rowan didn't know, and what Avery struggled to find the right moment to reveal, was that she had been born Aidan Loran. From a young age, Aidan had known that his true identity didn't match the body he was born with. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, he had faced bullying and discrimination, but with the support of his parents, he began his transition in his late teens. By the time Avery met Rowan, she had been living as her authentic self for several years. She had undergone hormone therapy and gender confirmation surgery, embracing her identity as a woman fully. The pain and struggles of her past had shaped her into a compassionate and resilient person, qualities that Rowan adored without knowing their origin. As their relationship grew serious, Avery wrestled with when and how to tell Rowan about her past. She feared that the revelation might change how he saw her, or worse, end their relationship entirely. But she also knew that honesty was crucial for a lasting partnership. One evening, about a year into their relationship, Avery finally gathered the courage to share her truth with Rowan. They were sitting on the banks of the Jordan River, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. With trembling hands, Avery began to tell her story. To her immense relief and joy, Rowan listened with empathy and understanding. He assured her that he loved her for who she was and that her past didn't change his feelings for her. However, they both agreed to keep Avery's history private. Living in a conservative community like Mill Creek, they feared the potential backlash and discrimination Avery might face if her transgender identity became public knowledge. They decided that their love and commitment to each other were what mattered most, and the details of Avery's past were theirs alone to know. As they planned their wedding, Rowan and Avery looked forward to building a life together in Mill Creek. They dreamed of starting a family, possibly through adoption, and creating a home filled with love and acceptance. Little did they know that their decision to keep Avery's past a secret would set the stage for a tragic turn of events that would test the limits of their love and the bonds of family. The Ashford-Loran wedding was the event of the season in Mill Creek. The ceremony took place on a bright June afternoon at the local Mormon temple, its white spires reaching towards a cloudless blue sky. Rowan stood at the altar, his face beaming with joy as Avery walked down the aisle. She was a vision in a flowing white gown. The assembled guests, a mix of family, friends, and what seemed like half the town, watched with misty eyes as the couple exchanged their vows. Evelyn Ashford sat in the front row, a forced smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. Throughout the ceremony, she couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was off about her new daughter-in-law. Perhaps it was the way Avery's hands seemed larger than most women's, or how her voice sometimes dipped a little too low. Evelyn tried to dismiss these thoughts, attributing them to the stress of the day and her natural protectiveness over her only son. The reception was held in the backyard of the Ashford family home, transformed into a fairy tale setting with twinkling lights and fragrant flower arrangements. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, Evelyn watched from the sidelines, her unease growing. She overheard snippets of conversation from Avery's side of the family, hushed words about bravery and new beginnings. That seemed odd in the context of a wedding. When it came time for the mother-son dance, Evelyn held Rowan close, studying his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. But all she saw was pure happiness. As they swayed to the music, Evelyn whispered, "Rowan, are you sure about this?" He looked at her puzzled and replied, "Mom, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love Avery with all my heart." As the evening wore on, Evelyn's suspicions continued to gnaw at her. She noticed how Avery avoided certain topics when chatting with the other women, and how she seemed uncomfortable when the conversation turned to childhood memories. By the time the last guest had left and the happy couple had departed for their honeymoon, Evelyn was convinced that there was more to Avery Loran than met the eye. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. In the days following the wedding, while Rowan and Avery were honeymooning in Hawaii, Evelyn Ashford found herself unable to shake her suspicions about her new daughter-in-law. The nagging doubts that had plagued her during the ceremony had taken root, growing into an obsession that consumed her every waking moment. Evelyn began her investigation by scouring social media, hoping to find some clue in Avery's past that might explain her unease. She created fake accounts to follow Avery's old classmates and coworkers, watching for any slip that might reveal a hidden truth. When this yielded nothing concrete, she turned to more drastic measures. Using her influence as a prominent member of the community, Evelyn managed to gain access to Avery's employment records at the advertising firm. She pored over the documents, looking for inconsistencies or gaps in Avery's history. It was here that she found her first real lead. Avery's social security number seemed to have been issued more recently than it should have been for someone of her age. Fueled by this discovery, Evelyn's search intensified. She hired a private investigator, draining a significant portion of her savings in the process. The investigator dug deep into Avery's past, tracking down old-school records and medical files. It was in these medical records that Evelyn finally found what she had been looking for, or rather, what she feared she would find. The moment of realization came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, when her eyes fell upon a document that made her blood run cold. It was a medical report from a clinic in Portland, Oregon, dated 6 years ago. The report detailed hormone therapy and surgical procedures for one Aidan Loran. Evelyn's world tilted on its axis. The teacup she had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, but she barely noticed, her eyes fixed on the damning evidence before her. Her son's wife, the woman she had welcomed into her family, was transgender. As the initial shock wore off, a maelstrom of emotions swept through Evelyn: anger at being deceived, fear for her son's future, and a deep-seated disgust that she was ashamed to acknowledge. She thought of Rowan, imagining him blissfully unaware on some Hawaiian beach, and her heart broke for him. In her mind, Evelyn began to rationalize her next steps. She convinced herself that Rowan couldn't possibly know the truth. Avery must have tricked him, manipulated him into marriage, without revealing her true identity. Evelyn saw herself as the only one who could save her son from this deception, the only one who could protect the family name from scandal. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the kitchen, Evelyn made a decision that would alter the course of many lives. She couldn't allow this marriage to continue. She couldn't let Avery destroy her son's life and tarnish the Ashford family reputation. In her mind, twisted by prejudice and fear, she began to see only one solution. Evelyn Ashford, respected pillar of the Mill Creek community, loving mother and devout Mormon, made the choice to become a murderer. She would eliminate the threat to her son and her family's standing, and she would do it in a way that would leave no trace, no suspicion. After all, accidents happened all the time, didn't they? As she cleaned up the broken teacup, a plan began to form in Evelyn's mind. She would bide her time, wait for the right moment, and when it came, she would rid her family of the person she now saw not as a beloved daughter-in-law, but as a dangerous imposter who needed to be removed. With her mind set on eliminating Avery, Evelyn Ashford threw herself into planning the perfect crime. She knew she needed to act quickly before her resolve wavered or her son had a chance to discover Avery's secret on his own. The newlyweds were due to return from their honeymoon in just 5 days, giving Evelyn a narrow window to prepare. Her first step was to research undetectable poisons. Evelyn spent hours hunched over her computer, diving into the dark corners of the internet. She learned about various toxic substances, their effects, and how they could be disguised. After careful consideration, she settled on a potent plant-based toxin that could easily be mistaken for a severe allergic reaction. Acquiring the poison proved to be more challenging than Evelyn had anticipated. She couldn't risk purchasing it online and leaving a digital trail. Instead, she drove to Salt Lake City, disguised in a wig and oversized sunglasses. There she found a small, out-of-the-way shop that specialized in exotic plants and herbs. With a story about needing a particular plant for a research project, Evelyn managed to purchase the raw materials. Evelyn needed to act. In Mill Creek, she converted her garage into a makeshift laboratory. She followed online instructions meticulously, carefully extracting and concentrating the toxin. As she worked, she justified her actions to herself, repeating like a mantra that she was protecting her son, her family, her community. With the poison prepared, Evelyn turned her attention to the method of delivery. She knew she needed a way to administer the toxin that wouldn't raise suspicion. The solution came to her as she was baking her famous peach cobbler, a dish she often made for family gatherings. No, one would think twice about her serving it to welcome the newlyweds home. Evelyn spent the next day perfecting her recipe, calculating the exact amount of poison needed to be lethal without altering the cobbler's taste or appearance. She prepared 2 versions, one laced with the toxin for Avery and a safe one for the rest of the family. To ensure she didn't mix them up, she marked the poisoned cobbler dish with a small, discreet scratch on the bottom. As the day of Rowan and Avery's return approached, Evelyn finalized the details of her plan. She would host a family brunch the day after they got back, under the guise of hearing about their honeymoon. During the meal, she would serve the poisoned cobbler to Avery. If all went as planned, Avery would fall ill shortly after, and by the time medical help arrived, it would be too late. On the eve of the newlyweds' return, Evelyn stood in her kitchen, looking at the 2 identical cobblers cooling on the counter. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really prepared to take a life to devastate her son? But then she thought of the future she feared, the scandal, the gossip, the destruction of everything she held dear. Her resolve hardened. In her mind, she wasn't committing murder, she was saving her family. With that thought, Evelyn carefully placed the cobblers in the refrigerator and went to bed, ready to set her plan in motion the next day. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Ashford family dining room, casting a warm glow over the elaborate brunch spread. Evelyn had been up since dawn, meticulously arranging every detail of the welcome home gathering for Rowan and Avery. The table was set with her best china, fresh flowers adorned the center, and the aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the air. As the clock struck 11, the sound of car doors slamming announced the arrival of the newlyweds. Evelyn smoothed her apron and plastered on her most convincing smile. Rowan burst through the door first, his face tanned from the Hawaiian sun and his eyes bright with happiness. He swept his mother into a bear hug, exclaiming, "Mom, we had the most amazing time!" Avery followed close behind, looking radiant in a flowing summer dress. She embraced Evelyn warmly, thanking her for the welcome home brunch. Evelyn returned the hug stiffly, her skin crawling at the contact. If Avery noticed the coldness, she didn't show it. The rest of the family trickled in. Rowan's older sister Beatrice with her husband and 2 children, and his younger brother Caleb. As they gathered around the table, the room filled with chatter and laughter. Rowan and Avery regaled them with tales of their honeymoon adventures, from snorkeling with sea turtles to watching the sunrise from a volcano's peak. Evelyn moved around the table, filling coffee cups and encouraging everyone to help themselves to the food. She watched like a hawk as Avery loaded her plate, noting with grim satisfaction when she took a large piece of the peach cobbler, the poisoned one, marked with the subtle scratch that only Evelyn knew to look for. As the meal progressed, Evelyn found it increasingly difficult to maintain her composure. Every time Avery took a bite of the cobbler, Evelyn's heart raced. She found herself both dreading and anticipating the moment when the poison would take effect. About halfway through the brunch, Avery suddenly paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She put it down slowly, a slight frown creasing her brow. Rowan, deep in conversation with Caleb, didn't notice at first, but Evelyn saw. She saw the beads of sweat forming on Avery's forehead, the way her hands began to tremble. The scene unfolded with mounting tension as Evelyn's feigned concern drew attention to Avery's sudden distress. As Avery expressed feeling unwell, Rowan rushed to her side, his worry evident. Before she could fully explain her symptoms, Avery collapsed into a violent seizure, falling from her chair to the floor. The dining room erupted into chaos. Rowan cradled Avery's convulsing body, desperately calling her name. Beatrice hurried to contact emergency services, while Caleb ran to fetch water. The children's cries added to the pandemonium. Evelyn, the orchestrator of this horrific event, found herself paralyzed by the reality of her actions. She watched, unable to maintain her facade of shock and concern, as the scene she had planned unfolded before her. Avery's condition rapidly deteriorated. Foam appeared at her mouth, and her breathing became labored. Rowan, overcome with panic, pleaded for help from his family. Beatrice relayed instructions from the 911 operator, advising them to turn Avery on her side. With great difficulty, Rowan and Caleb managed to reposition Avery. As her seizure intensified, her skin took on a worrying blue tinge. Rowan, in tears, held her hand and whispered words of comfort. The arrival of the paramedics brought a glimmer of hope to the nightmarish scene. They swiftly assessed Avery's critical condition and prepared her for transport. When questioned about Avery's medical history, Rowan, his voice strained with emotion, could only respond that she had always been in perfect health. Evelyn watched as they rushed Avery out to the waiting ambulance, Rowan close behind. As the sirens faded into the distance, she mechanically began to clear the table, her movements slow and deliberate. She picked up Avery's plate, noting the half-eaten piece of cobbler. With steady hands, she scraped the remaining dessert into the trash and washed the plate thoroughly. The rest of the family moved in a daze, shock written across their faces. Beatrice hugged her children close, while Caleb paced the living room, running his hands through his hair. No one noticed Evelyn's calm demeanor, her lack of tears or panic. As she finished cleaning up, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of relief. Her plan had worked perfectly. Now, she just had to wait for the inevitable news and play the part of the grieving mother-in-law. Little did she know that her carefully constructed plan was about to unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. The news of Avery Ashford's sudden death sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Mill Creek. What had begun as a joyous homecoming for the newlyweds had ended in tragedy, leaving the town reeling and searching for answers. Detective Liam Holloway of the Mill Creek Police Department was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator with a reputation for thoroughness, Holloway approached the Ashford residence 2 days after Avery's death. The family was still in a state of shock, with Rowan barely able to speak through his grief. Holloway's first step was to interview each family member present at the brunch. He started with Rowan, gently probing for details about Avery's health and the events leading up to her collapse. Rowan, his eyes red-rimmed and voice hoarse, insisted that Avery had been in perfect health. She had no allergies, no pre-existing conditions. "It just doesn't make any sense," he kept repeating. Next, Holloway spoke with Evelyn. She presented a picture of calm sorrow, expressing her shock at losing her daughter-in-law so suddenly. She recounted the events of the brunch with precise detail, her story aligning perfectly with the others. If Holloway noticed her lack of emotion, he didn't comment on it. As the detective made his way through the family members, a consistent narrative emerged. Everyone described a normal family gathering that had turned tragic in the blink of an eye. No one could point to anything unusual about the meal or Avery's behavior prior to her collapse. However, the autopsy results painted a different picture. The medical examiner's report landed on Holloway's desk a week after Avery's death, and its contents were puzzling to say the least. The cause of death was listed as acute toxicity from an unidentified plant-based poison. There were no signs of an allergic reaction or any other natural cause that could explain Avery's sudden demise. The detective returned to the Ashford home, this time with a team of forensic specialists. They combed through the house, paying particular attention to the kitchen and dining room. Samples were taken from leftover food, and every surface was dusted for fingerprints. As the investigation progressed, Holloway began to notice small inconsistencies in the family's statements. Rowan mentioned that his mother had been acting strangely since the wedding, seeming distant and preoccupied. Beatrice recalled that Evelyn had been unusually insistent about serving her peach cobbler at the brunch, despite it not being peach season. These details, while seemingly insignificant on their own, began to form a pattern in Holloway's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than a simple tragic accident. As he left the Ashford home that day, Holloway knew that unraveling the truth behind Avery's death would require him to dig deep into the family's history and secrets. As weeks passed, Detective Holloway's investigation intensified. He delved into the backgrounds of each family member, searching for any clues that might shed light on Avery's mysterious death. His attention increasingly focused on Evelyn Ashford, whose calm demeanor in the face of tragedy struck him as odd. Holloway's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While interviewing Avery's colleagues at the advertising firm, he met Zoe Chen, Avery's closest friend at work. Zoe was visibly distraught, and after some gentle prodding, she revealed a secret that Avery had shared with her in confidence. Her voice barely above a whisper, Zoe told Holloway about Avery's transgender identity. She explained how Avery had transitioned years before meeting Rowan, and how the couple had decided to keep this information private due to fears of discrimination in their conservative community. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Holloway now had a potential motive, but he needed evidence to connect it to Avery's death. He began to re-examine Evelyn's actions in the days leading up to the fatal brunch. Meanwhile, Rowan was struggling to come to terms with his loss. As he sorted through Avery's belongings, he stumbled upon a locked box hidden in the back of their closet. Inside, he found documents detailing Avery's transition, including medical records and old identification cards in the name of Aidan Laurent. Initially shocked, Rowan's love for Avery ultimately overshadowed any feelings of betrayal. However, as he reflected on the days following their wedding, a chilling realization began to dawn on him. He recalled his mother's odd behavior, her probing questions about Avery's past, and her insistence on hosting the homecoming brunch. With growing horror, Rowan started to suspect that his mother might somehow be involved in Avery's death. He reached out to Detective Holloway, sharing his discoveries and suspicions. Armed with this new information, Holloway obtained a warrant to search Evelyn's property more thoroughly. In her garage, they discovered traces of the same plant toxin found in Avery's system. A search of her computer revealed a history of visits to websites discussing undetectable poisons. The most damning evidence came from Evelyn's own meticulous nature. In a hidden compartment of her desk, detectives found a diary detailing her discovery of Avery's past, her decision to protect her son, and a chilling account of how she had planned and executed the poisoning. The investigation had reached its culmination, and Detective Holloway was prepared to make an arrest. However, he chose to give Rowan the opportunity to confront his mother first, hoping that a face-to-face encounter might lead to a confession and spare the family the ordeal of a public trial. With a heavy heart, Rowan agreed to this approach. He invited Evelyn to the home he had once shared with Avery, a place now filled with bittersweet memories. As they sat in the living room, surrounded by reminders of happier times, Rowan steeled himself for the difficult conversation ahead. He began by confronting his mother with what he knew, his voice wavering with emotion as he asked her to tell him the truth about what had happened to Avery. The weight of his words visibly impacted Evelyn, and her carefully maintained composure began to crumble. Faced with her son's pain and the evidence of her actions, Evelyn's resolve faltered. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Rowan, fully realizing the magnitude of what she had done. In a moment of vulnerability, she began to apologize, attempting to explain her misguided intentions. As Evelyn's confession unfolded, Detective Holloway listened from an adjacent room, capturing every word. The truth was finally coming to light, but its revelation would have far-reaching consequences for all involved, forever altering the fabric of their lives and relationships. The living room of Rowan and Avery's home, once a sanctuary of love and new beginnings, now felt suffocating as Evelyn's confession hung heavy in the air. Rowan sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief and anguish as his mother recounted the details of her heinous act. Evelyn's words tumbled out in a torrent of justification and remorse. She spoke of her shock upon discovering Avery's past, her fear of scandal, and her misguided belief that she was saving her son from a life of deception. With each sentence, she seemed to age before Rowan's eyes, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her guilt. As Evelyn broke down, sobbing and begging for forgiveness, Detective Holloway entered the room. His face was grim as he addressed Evelyn. "Mrs. Ashford," he said solemnly, "I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Avery Ashford. You have the right to remain silent." In the days that followed, the arrest of Evelyn Ashford sent shockwaves through Mill Creek. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the respected widow and volunteer with the reality of her actions. Rowan retreated into isolation, grappling with the dual loss of his wife and the shattering of his relationship with his mother. He found himself reevaluating every memory, every interaction, wondering how he could have been so blind to the darkness lurking beneath his mother's devotion. As Evelyn awaited trial in county jail, Rowan was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. The home he had shared with Avery, once filled with dreams of their future together, now felt like a mausoleum of lost hope. Yet, amidst his grief and anger, a small part of him recognized that the truth, as painful as it was preferable to a lifetime of lies. The arrest of Evelyn Ashford marked the end of one chapter in this tragic story, but for Rowan and the community of Mill Creek, the process of healing and reconciliation was only just beginning. Evelyn, looking frail and defeated, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Her attorney argued for leniency, citing her age and her previously unblemished record. But the judge, moved by victim impact statements from Rowan and Avery's family, sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison. For Rowan, the trial's conclusion brought little comfort. He found himself thrust into the role of reluctant spokesperson, using his platform to advocate for LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance. In honoring Avery's memory, he slowly began to heal, channeling his grief into positive action.